The repression of dissent. When I realized that we needed to talk about this, I also asked myself, but since when does dissent actually exist? Because one thing is conflict. Conflict is always present everywhere. That's fine. Dissent is something else. And in fact, if you quoted Bobbio, who says that dissent is essential in democracy, perhaps democracy is essential for dissent to actually exist. What I mean to say is that dissent means that people are informed about the politics that the government is implementing and discuss it publicly, disagreeing and protesting against this policy. Is that clear? Throughout history, in fact, for a very long time this concept did not exist at all, because the idea that people should be informed about the government's political decisions and could criticize them was in no way part of the collective horizon, whether we are talking about the Roman Empire, medieval monarchies, or even more modern ones. As I mentioned, in the Middle Ages, society is one where power is weak compared to the complexity of social forces. However, in the Roman Empire, in the empires that were inspired by it, from the Russian to the Ottoman, and in the absolute states of modern Europe, politics. Perhaps I am repeating something I said before, but not exactly in the same way. I believe there is a different nuance. Politics was not something the people needed to concern themselves with. Politics is determined by the sovereign and his ministers and advisors in what is indeed referred to as the secret council in the states from the end of the Middle Ages onwards. It is a matter known to the sovereign secretaries, who are specifically chosen individuals capable of keeping secrets. Politics is not to be discussed. To discuss it, at the very least, is already a crime. Of the Roman Empire, no one discusses, then, no one. We are talking about the population as a whole. It is clear that around the sovereign, around the ministers, there exists a ruling class of involved people, of interested individuals, of those who can aspire to be part of the magic circle. I am not talking about them. I am talking about the population as a whole. The remaining 99% of the population should not concern themselves with what the sovereign and the government do. They should not even know about it, and should not pretend to know. It is already a form of betrayal to pretend to know. All right, in the Roman Empire, even making a horoscope for the emperor to know when he would die was considered high treason. If you were caught doing that, you would end up on the pyre directly. In general, politics, I repeat, is a secret matter that takes place in cabinets. So, in that context, dissent does not even exist. Dissent is inconceivable. A revolt can break out because we don't like the new taxes, and so in our city we are rebelling and we have dealt with the tax collector, and we will see what happens. But this is not dissent. It is something else. It is conflict, certainly, but not dissent. Dissent means to publicly discuss and declare one's disagreement with what the government is doing. I don't believe now. I can't provide a complete overview. Maybe I'm mistaken. But in my personal memory, the term dissent, the very word dissent, and the word dissidents entered our political lexicon actually. Thinking of a world we thought was different, thinking of the Soviet Union, of the people's democracies. In the 20th century, when we spoke of dissent, we referred to those in the Soviet Union who challenged the authorities, opposed their policies, risking imprisonment, forced labor, and so on. The West did not refer that word to itself, in my opinion, but perhaps precisely because at that time our democracies, which were still democracies, took for granted that dissent, discussion, and conflict are part of democratic life. It may seem strange. I said earlier that dissent is essential to democracy, and yet the Soviet Union comes to mind. However, be careful, because the Soviet Union, which obviously does not resemble our idea of democracy, was something very different from those fascist dictatorships, where democracy was publicly repudiated and mocked as a rotten and corrupt system. This must be clear to us. It is a disorienting thing, but if one reads Mussolini's speeches and the newspapers, La Stampa and Il Corriere della Sera, from the 1930s, it becomes evident that under fascism, democracy was a dirty word, and democratic was an insult. The democratic powers, Pluto Judo, were the rotten, corrupt countries. We are not democratic. This was the battle cry of fascism, of course. The Soviet Union was a completely different discourse. It is no coincidence that those countries were keen to call themselves people's democracies. It then became increasingly clear that the concept of people's democracy allows for only one party, because who could be against the people? We don't want those. Indeed, it has been seen that the concept of democracy they implemented was very far from the aspirations of many. However, those were not countries where people spoke poorly of democracy. On the contrary, they wanted to, they pretended, but officially they were democratic countries where dissenters emerged who clung precisely to this. Dissidents are then persecuted by the judiciary in the Soviet Union, generally by female judges, because it was a country where, while we hardly saw any women in the judiciary, the majority of judges or engineers were women. I mention this because there are many things about that country that are worth remembering. Afterward, in the Soviet Union, dissenters were arrested and tried, defending themselves by stating that in a democracy, there is the right to dissent. And for us, the discourse was no, because dissent is the legitimate play of true democracies, right? That there are different opinions, right? So, dissent and the repression of dissent as a relatively recent problem in politics. However, politics is not the only aspect of life. There are also other dimensions of collective life, other dimensions that are equally public, and that in other times could engage the masses. Just as much as politics has been able to do in more recent times. I think of religion, for example. So, if one thinks about the history of the relationship between political power and religion, we can suddenly trace back the idea of dissent, of dissenting movements, and of a power that must decide how to act towards dissenters. Think about the Christians in the Roman Empire. Christians in a Roman Empire where religion is free, in the sense that since almost everyone is polytheistic, except for that one small people who will be talked about a lot, the Jews, whom the Romans indeed found to be very strange people, believe in one God, and do not want the others. But fortunately, the Jews kept to themselves, did not make converts, and did not try to convert anyone, so the Roman Empire had come to terms with it. Everyone else was convinced, as they would tell them, guys, but look, it's obvious, right? It is full of deities. There is probably a deity inside that tree as well. It is full of deities. So everyone chooses their own, prays to anyone they want. They pray, not that they prayed much, they asked for favors. They made sacrifices to the gods, to show that it was the gods whom the people respected, and therefore they should not take it out on us. And then the Christians arrive, who at first the Romans confused with the Jews, also because the first Christians are naturally Jews. However, they quickly gain converts, and the Christians pose a problem because while the Jews keep to themselves, the Christians are becoming increasingly numerous. You see them popping up everywhere, and you don't know what they are doing because they celebrate their rites in private. Unlike normal people who go to the temple and in front of the temple under everyone's eyes, offer sacrifices to the deity they have chosen. These people have their own god, but what do they do in their meetings? It's unknown because they don't let anyone else in. And who is this god? He is one whom we condemned to death by crucifixion for high treason. Ah, what a beautiful god you have chosen. Here, after that. Are you surprised that the police started to open a file when they found out that, unfortunately, a community of these has appeared in our city as well? Let's keep an eye on them. We keep an eye on them, and even good people keep an eye on them. Look, there is a Christian. But do you know what they say they do? They eat and drink the blood of their God in their gatherings. They eat its flesh. Ah, exactly. But then, beyond misunderstandings, Christians are a problem. It's not that they reject the authority of the emperor, not at all. But the emperor asks good citizens, on many occasions, to go to the temple of the great gods of Rome, and then everyone has their own. The subjects are of all ethnicities. The Arabs have their Arab gods, and the Germans have their German gods. But there are the gods of Rome, Jupiter, those gods, and then also the family of the emperor, who also become gods, the deceased emperors. There are civic cults there, and people must go there, because without those gods, everything falls apart. If the empire moves forward, if the harvests are good, if there is no plague, if we defeat the barbarians, it is because the gods are helping us. Everyone must go to the temple on the emperor's birthday to make an offering. Christians do not go there. Does it make sense? Well, at that point, it does make sense. When a Christian is arrested, they say, "But I am not against the authority, I am obedient, good, and I pay my taxes. However, I cannot go to the temple." And there, behold an autocratic, absolute government that is not used to discussing what it does with the people, with magistrates who instead find themselves having to discuss with these unfortunate individuals. We have the records. In the Acts of the Martyrs, there are entire pieces of transcripts preserved with the magistrate saying, "So you don't want to go and make the sacrifice?" "No, I can't," he says. "But are you sure?" "No, I can't." "But look, go there, burn that little piece of incense." "I can't, my God forbids it." He says, "But look, it ends very badly." "Huh? Go on." "I can't." In the end, the magistrates condemn them to death because you offend the emperor and endanger the Roman Empire with your dissent if you do not go to make the sacrifice to the gods. That is a form of dissent that does not want to have anything political because, I repeat, it is all legends that Christians wanted equality, etc. Equality up there, not down here. And as for wanting to abolish slavery, just imagine. However, regarding this matter, the only aspect in which religion assumes a political and civic value, Christians dissent, and the government represses. It represses with extreme violence. Except that, by force of repressing, these people continue to multiply. Repression is not permanent. Let it be clear. It's not that we have to remain hidden in the catacombs. Christians exist, tolerated, albeit tacitly, but with the police keeping an eye on them, and then there is an emperor who says the situation is a bit unpleasant at the moment. There is famine. We need an enemy for that matter. Here, needing an enemy to point out to the people, let's launch a nice campaign against the Christians. A lot of people are happy. I've always said that they are dangerous people. Finally, the emperor has decided to get rid of them. Then they never manage to eliminate them all. A period returns in which Christians continue to move forward clandestinely, and Christians are strong. Their message appeals to a lot of people. Then there are communities. This is what they do to resist repression. They are cohesive communities that provide social assistance, helping widows, children who have lost their parents, and the poor. These kinds of support are appreciated in a society where such forms of assistance are lacking. Therefore, the number of Christians is continually increasing. After that, the astonishing thing is that even at the beginning of the 4th century, Emperor Diocletian carries out a very violent persecution, the most decisive one indeed. It even forces Christian priests to hand over the Gospels to burn their books and eliminates a lot of people. Many repent, go to make sacrifices, and so on. Then, the successors of Diocletian, almost overnight, start to question whether it is worth it, whether it is politically worthwhile. First, there comes a man named Galerius, who says these Christians are a bunch of... However, we are unable in any way to convince them to return to the rightful religion of their fathers and abandon their superstitious beliefs. So for the moment, let's stop pursuing them because I'm fed up. But a moment later, another one arrives, Constantine, who presents a different argument. And the reasoning behind it is clearly, from a political standpoint, much better to have friends. There are many of them. They are everywhere. In every city, there are strong Christian communities. Even a lot of important people have become Christians. If not the senator, then his wife, because they work well with women and they do it effectively. Women's participation and the attention of the Christian clergy in the early centuries to women's consent is an important aspect of the spread of Christianity. And so the political discourse does not pay to pursue them. It is much better to have them as friends. This, however, also leads to a somewhat higher discourse, which is that we as a state continue to think about how many gods might exist, and who knows what is up there. No one really knows. To ensure that anyone up there is happy with us, the sovereign must allow everyone to pray as they wish to whomever they want. It is said of Milan, of Constantine, there from one day to the next, the resistance of those who, despite everything, carry on for 3 centuries is monitored by the police, and then in the end, they explode and take command. But I am going on too long, forgive me, I will finish. They take command and of course they argue among themselves. There are many ways to be Christian, but is Jesus truly the Son of God? Or was it created like us? Has it always existed? Or did it arrive at a certain point? But is he man and God? Yes, true man, yes, he is also true God, yes, but he is not just man. I am making light of them, but in reality these are theologically sophisticated discussions, clearly, but as long as the discussion is among scholars, it is not a matter of dissent in our sense. The problem arises when medieval society, developing over time, begins to become a complex, wealthy society where there are many people who can read and write. And again, in Europe during the 12th and 13th centuries, the discourse is not so much about monitoring the politics of the sovereign and protesting against his decisions, but rather about certain points of disagreement with what the priest says in church. For example, I believe that purgatory does not exist. It was invented by the priests so that we make offerings for the poor souls of our grandfather. This is just one example. And dissent arises in a society where everyone is a believer and where the religious dimension is of great importance, because they truly believe. Of course, they all sin endlessly, but they also believe in the devil, hell, and hopefully paradise, and fortunately, purgatory is a great thing even if you have done. However, there are also strong-minded individuals who say, yes, they make you believe this thing. Thus, dissent arises in a realm that is not directly political, but which means standing against one of the great powers that organize and regulate that society. And it is clear that the Christian clergy does not have to repress by vocation. On the contrary, Christianity was born from endless discussions among theologians, and allowed for a wide range of differing opinions. However, once it is decided that a certain dogma is the correct one, then, please, let's discuss something else, but that matter has been settled. But when the shepherd arrives, the farmer says to the priest, I don't believe in this thing you just said in church, do I? So, after a while, the parish priest reports to the bishop saying, look, there are more and more people here telling me they don't believe, and so the church must decide what to do, and at that point it must equip itself with repressive apparatuses. Not only be about repressive apparatuses, let it be clear, because at that moment the church takes its time. The first madman who arrives in Rome saying, "My name is Valdo, I come from Lyon, I have read the gospel, I have seen that it speaks of poverty, what a beautiful thing, the apostles went barefoot, we want to do the same, and speak to people about the message of Christ." They look at him, tell him, give him a bit of an examination, discover that he is as ignorant as a goat, and so they say to him, "No way, you are going around preaching, it's forbidden, go back home, behave yourself, and be quiet." But 30 years later, when another madman, the same, who comes from Assisi and is called Francis, arrives in Rome saying, "I have read the gospel. I have seen this beautiful thing about the poverty of Christ and the apostles. My friends and I want to live like that too." And at that point in Rome, they don't say, "Go back home and beware if we see you again." They say, "Let's talk about it. Let's see. Try it out. And let's see what happens." However, at the same time, they also begin to say that we need to send people out to speak to the public and teach the truth, because those others, whom we told to be quiet, are not being quiet. And how does dissent manifest in that case? In secrecy. Going around covertly. To do what? To speak to people in secret. It's all a bustling activity of activists, we would say today, who go around, arrive in a country, have some acquaintances, and have contacts. We know this because when the repression begins, the inquisitors interrogate people. The woman says, "Yes, yes. When my husband was still alive, sometimes while we were in bed talking, he would tell me, 'Do you want to come and hear some good words?' However, I never went." And these movements survive. Should we give people what they want? Do they want to hear discussions about faith and religion better than how the poor parish priest manages, who has 1,000 other things to do? And we create preachers who know how to go to the people and resolve all doubts. However, at that point, we are also authorized to tell the people that when you have doubts, come to us, and we solve them for you. But if you continue to think the wrong things, sooner or later you will receive a nice summons. The inquisitor wants to speak to you. Show up tomorrow. And thus, a repressive apparatus is created, which, however, is not the only response, and with which the church actually, largely, regains control over the consciousness of the masses. That's that case there. Here, in short, I have gathered a few things, but in terms of political meaning, I would certainly say it is a recent problem. Society has 1,000 ways to confront those from above who tell you what to think, what to do, and to develop different opinions, even in a field that is not directly political. The question also included the theme of how the university, as an institution and as a community, can, should, or does well or poorly in taking a stand and adopting positions. This is a very troubling issue. Because we say this, the unpleasantness of the era we live in. Our Western countries is also linked to the fact that it creates a common consensus that certain statements are true, good, and right. And consequently, those who say otherwise must be silenced. Certain positions are just and sacred, and therefore we must stand up for those positions. It is obvious that I also agree with what you said, that science and research are never neutral, because none of us is neutral. However, we are individuals, all those who study, conduct research, and teach. This discourse also applies to schools. In fact, are individuals with their own consciousness, who then find themselves operating within an organization. What should be the relationship between your conscience and the guidelines or statutes of the institution to which you belong? I must say that I find it explicit, that even when it comes to taking a stand on a just cause, it seems to me that you at the University of Turin are discussing stating that the University of Turin is against the war, right? And putting it in the statute. What a wonderful thing. And who could possibly be against the idea of stating in the university's charter that the University of Turin is against war. I, on the other hand, feel very uncomfortable about these things. I am a student of a great medievalist from the University of Turin named Giovanni Tabacco, who was a man who shaped me in every way. I learned to write thanks to him. Well, I don't want to go on, but he has been a very important person for me. He was not a believer, and on some occasion he wrote a phrase that has stuck with me. Now it is certain that we do not intend to entrust our soul to any priest. That is, my conscience is my guiding line, and in certain matters, it can only be that. Now I remember a character I talked about in a lesson that is online, so maybe someone already knows it and will forgive me. There was a great German historian in the 20th century named Ernst Kantorowicz. He was a prominent German bourgeois from the early 20th century, a German nationalist, who served in World War I as an officer. Then, during the turbulent post-war period in Germany, when the Freikorps, the far-right paramilitary groups, violently repressed the attempts of communist revolution in Germany, I am referring to 1919 and 1920, Kantorowicz was at the forefront of the Freikorps, far-right militarists, fighting communists in the streets, and he was also wounded in combat against the communists. He had a successful academic career in Germany, holding firmly nationalist right-wing positions, until Hitler came to power. A small detail emerged. He was Jewish, Kantorowicz, and he discovered that being a staunch German nationalist of the far right was not enough to make the Nazis forget that he was Jewish, so he had to leave. Since he was a famous historian, he was immediately given a position at Berkeley, in the United States, where he lived happily for years teaching. Until the post-war period at the University of Berkeley. We're talking about the late 1940s, you know. McCarthyism. When, in the United States, a particular type of dissent, one inspired by communist ideals, was deemed criminal and needed to be eliminated. It was not permissible in the United States to be a communist, to declare oneself a communist, or to engage in communist propaganda. The University of Berkeley thought it was a wonderful thing to declare that the University of Berkeley was free from communists, and to demand that all faculty members of that university swear that they were not communists. Ernst Kantorowicz, who had been wounded fighting against the communists in the streets of Berlin, refused to sign, leading a battle that lasted for years, which ultimately saw him lose his position after having created a movement. Moreover, he was immediately given back his position at Princeton, very pleased that those idiots at Berkeley had kicked him out. Anyway, he risked everything and fought this battle, saying precisely, "But come and tell me if I am anti-communist." I am anti-communist, but I do not accept that the university where I teach tells me that I must swear whether I am for or against something, because I answer to my own conscience. To tell you how different those times were from ours, it would be laughable today, but he said, "There are three professions that wear the toga: the priest, the magistrate, and the university professor. And those who practice one of these three professions must answer to their own conscience and nothing more." Today I repeat, it would be laughable, but in short, this is to say that in my opinion he was right. And so I believe that it is our conscience that must tell us, knowing that we are not neutral, which positions we can and want to take, and not the universities or schools where we teach.